Hello, I am Kristen Lopez, the TV editor at IndieWire, and I am so excited to get to be talking today with Ben Lobato, who is the amazing. Do we want to say showrunner? I always feel like I say the wrong thing, and then somebody gets in trouble when I talk about your title at the on Queen of the South. But I'm going to say showrunner because that sounds right.
I don't want you to get in trouble by anybody. So
Exactly. I'm going to say showrunner. But I am honored and excited to get to be sitting here with Queen of the South showrunner Ben Lobato. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great, Kristen. It's such an honor to be here with you. And you're a fan of the show, and we've had conversations in the past, and your questions are always just so insightful. And I'm really just honored to be here.
Exactly. This show, you and I have talked about the significance of it and how I feel that that's just increased as the series is wrapping up. I don't know what I'm going to do now that the show is over. I guess watch the first season started all over again. But just in general, I mean, how does it feel to bring the ship home, so to speak, bring the series to its conclusion?
Wow, it's an incredible honor to be able to work on a series for 5 seasons, which, as you know, right now that's highly unusual that a show will go past 2 seasons. So to be able to go from, for the last 6 years, to be able to arc out this character um, over the course of 5 seasons. And, in the beginning of the show, we teased out with the Queen where this character of Teresa would go. So to be able to do that step by step, take our time, I mean, what an honor. And I'm so proud of where we've taken it and how we're kind of wrapping up the series and tying it all together at the end. It's just, I mean, it feels amazing. I can't describe it. I think few TV writers and producers have the pleasure of doing that, to be able to be on a series for 5 seasons and completely arc out a character. Wow, it's amazing. It's what we all dream of.
Exactly. You've been with the series since 2016. Do you remember the first episode you worked with the character of Teresa? And how did that jive with the last episode? Looking at the first episode you worked on and the last. I mean, how is that? What is the journey been like in looking back at the beginning and the end?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. When I came on, the pilot was already produced. So it was essentially episode 2 of the series. And Teresa finds herself in Dallas working with Camilla. She was kind of rescued, but she's kind of a hostage to this trafficker. And Teresa Mendoza takes a risk, and she decides, if I'm going to survive, I need to risk my life for this woman so I can make myself valuable. And so essentially that's how we started the series. We started the series with Teresa, who was a victim who refused to be victimized, who's somebody who found agency by putting her life on the line for the powers that be. In that case, it was Camilla, and she did so by swallowing packets of heroin and smuggling them to the airport. And that was how we kicked off the series after the pilot. It was, Teresa Mendoza taking a risk, proving that she can do something that was impossible, and succeeding and making herself a valued member of the cartel. And so to go from that to now, we're 5 seasons later, and Teresa Mendoza literally is the leader of the biggest cartel in the world, and to the point that she's dealing with the CIA, right? A Russian oligarchs. And to go from the girl that was swallowing packets of heroin that essentially were going to explode in her stomach in like 42 minutes, to being like, she's running the show, she's dealing with the CIA, and she's partnering with them, and she's going on this journey. I mean, it's really incredible to see where she's gone, and also how much she's changed.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I'm one of the people that came to this show late, as we've discussed. And jumping into this, I knew that the show was different. The minute for season one was two women playing opposite each other. You know, Elise and Veronica were just titans in those first three seasons, and we don't see women in power in these types of shows, especially women that are dealing with relationships or children. You know, it's usually kind of that you have to choose. Women can't have it all. You know, for you, especially in the seasons where the later seasons, as Teresa is trying to figure out where that balance is between having a life and the world of her business being her life. How did you want to balance that over the life of the series? And why do you think it's so important that we see women in these spheres, especially women of color?
Well, there's one of the things that we did when we came into the series, and one of the reasons why I signed on to do the series was simply that, which you just pointed out, which is, how do we explore women in these positions, right? And how do we differentiate the way they run the cartel versus the way a man would run the cartel? The perfect example is you can watch Narcos and watch Pablo Escobar and see how, he essentially, his strategy is violence, right? He gains power through violence, by being cold, calculating, essentially a sociopath. And what's the difference between that and how one of these women would do it? And of course, there's a lot more, there's a lot more at stake for them, particularly for the Camilla character, who in the first seasons we find out she has a family, she has a daughter, right? She's dealing with a teenage daughter, but they're not sociopaths. They're not trying to outgun the men in the business. They're actually outsmarting them, right? And so I think that was really interesting. I think Camilla was an interesting character because she wanted to have it both ways. She wanted to be, I'm more cunning and intelligent than them in this business. Like I'm savvier than them, but also if I need to, I can be bloodier than them. And so I think that was part of Camilla's downfall that we demonstrated. For Teresa, her idea was, I'm going to learn the business. I'm going to outsmart them all, but instead of outgunning them, my heart is going to be my biggest asset. So in essence, I'm going to prove that I'm smarter, but then because of my loyalty in my heart, I'm going to gain power with people coming alongside of me because of family and love. And so that was really interesting. And that hasn't been done before. It was a person who becomes the head of a cartel essentially because she's clinging to her moral code. That was like the secret sauce behind the Teresa Mendoza rise. And little by little, we had to question that. We had to chip away at that. Does this really work? Can she really run a cartel and be this powerful while maintaining that moral code? And so that's what we've been exploring. In terms of family dynamic, we have to be honest, right, about this world. This is a world that's violent. It's a world that's a zero-sum game. The stakes are life and death. And so bringing Teresa into the new seasons where now she has a family around her, so it's just not about her survival. It's about, how do I protect my family? That was a big thing for us, right? Because it needed to become, as she grew in size and stature of her business, we needed to give the audience a reason to stay with her, and that reason was her family. And that family has been devastated, just like Camilla's. And that's part of the reality of the show, right? Whereas Teresa's best efforts to keep her family safe, to keep them outside of the business, well, she fails, because ultimately that's the truth about this business. No matter how much she might try to do things differently, you cannot bifurcate your life. If you run a cartel, violence will be involved. And part of that violence is the targeting of family members. And family members, in many ways, is what makes you weak, right? And that's the reality of it. They become complications, they become priorities. And so we needed to explore that in truth. And we needed to take Teresa, through that kind of arc where she could have a family, people that she cared about, and then ultimately find out that despite her best efforts, she was not going to be able to maintain that same moral code if she was going to continue to succeed, survive, and keep her family safe. She would begin to have to turn to the dark side.
Well, to go off of that, I know you've spoken about this. It would be very easy, I think, in the wrong hands to write Teresa like you would a man and just put long hair on her and be like, we've done something. How did you want to avoid falling into that trap of Teresa has a heart because she's a woman? You're telling a story about a character who just has a heart. How did you want to avoid emphasizing that it's because of her gender?
Right. Well, a big part of that is setting up season one, putting Teresa through these terrible circumstances so that we can see what kind of was shaping her moral code. So that when she became a cartel queenpin, or she rose to the ranks of the cartel, she understood people. She understood people who were in trouble. She understood, the mules, right? People that were essentially victims, because she was at one point victimized, even though she wasn't a victim. And so as a result of that, instead of it being painting her as a person with just like, oh, she's a saint, we actually witnessed her experiencing these terrible things that happened to her. And as a result, we were able to sympathize with her and the decisions that she made, which were proving that moral code.
When we've seen what I call the Scarface narrative, the world is yours type of concept in so many shows and TV, and I know you have a complicated and complex look at the use of narco culture when it comes to television and film. I mean, for you, how do you look at our continued interest in this world, but also the bigger ramifications of how that continues to paint Latinos in the US and in Mexico?
Yeah, well, one of the things, coming into this series, there was so much, in the last few years, just politically, there was talk, there was so much that was happening, within our culture that was stereotyping specifically Mexicans and trying to tie them to the border, to cartels and crime. So we very much wanted to take a look at that and go like, how do we kind of dismantle that idea, right? The idea that like brown people are crossing the border in order to destroy our civilization because they're subhumans and they're sociopaths, right? And essentially what we did was we wanted to just like lift the hood and go, what's beneath this? What causes the formation of these cartels, and for that matter, organized crime? And ultimately, it always comes back to a lack of opportunity, which goes back to corruption, and systemic racism. And so we wanted to explore that. And those are some of the things that we did when we moved Teresa out of the border region and into New Orleans, right? We put her up against the judge so that we can see, okay, this is what happens when people are disempowered, right? When there's a corrupt system of overlords that doesn't allow people to actually succeed or actually give them opportunity so that they can rise up out of their situation. And so that was one of the things that we were really intent on doing, is just exploring corruption and the reason cartels exist. And ultimately, it comes down to a lack of opportunity.
How early in the planning stages for you did the final season come together? I mean, was that something that you saw the finale years in the making, or was it something that was coming through as you were starting to develop season 5 in general?
Well, there are hints at it, of course, in season 1, right? It's like she's going to live or she's going to die, and what would that look like? You know what I mean? And so we knew that she was going to get shot, because that's how she's introduced in the opening of the pilot. And she says, in her monologue, that she's going to be dead in 30 seconds. And so ultimately we have to explore, well, how did that happen? Right. So it was a matter of like, how do we get there? What are the circumstances surrounding that? And how can we, because we love this character, how do we find a way to redeem this character? Right. And so, so we knew that there were one or two choices. She was either gonna die, or she was gonna fake her death and escape somehow. And of course, because we loved this character, we wanted to figure out how we could fake her death and escape. So that was something that we were talking about way back in season 1, because of course you never know how long a show is going to go. And but the circumstances surrounding that, as well as who is there with her at the end, those things could not be settled, because going into season 1 and leaving season 1, we weren't sure yet about the James character. Were they going to connect? Like, we knew that there was chemistry there, but was he going to be there in the end? We didn't know, right? And definitely the Pote character, right, who was present in the pilot when she was raped, came together with her to in the end of season 1. There was no way of knowing that he would be there with her in the end and escape. And of course, the Kellyanne character, who didn't appear until I think it was season 3, right? So like, to know that she would be there, Pote would be there, James would be there with her, what that would look like, how we'd pull it off, no idea. But we did know that if we had our druthers, we were going to have the queen escape to fake her death. We didn't know what it would look like, or who would be there, or how we would get there, but it was always something that we had been talking about from the beginning.
I'm curious, why give her a happy ending? I think that's the thing that I was really struck by, is that, again, these stories tend to end with blood in the street, with, good triumphs over quote unquote evil, and that doesn't happen here. Can you talk a little bit about deciding that you didn't want to go with what convention said her character should receive at the end?
Right. Well, as you know, the gangster genre is a genre of tragedy, right? And so the main characters, inevitably Tony Montana, Carlito from Carlito's Way, you can go on and name these stories about organized crime, criminals, gangsters, and essentially their tragedy. So they're supposed to die in the end. And because they were set up to be really their morality tales, right? And so so in arcing out those characters, there's always a moment which is we call the moment of grace. And that's the moment when the character can decide, am I going to get out of this business? And if I get out and walk away right now, I can survive, and I'll be safe. But inevitably, in all of these stories, that character is unable to walk away, whether it's because of greed, it's because of vengeance. There's some part of their character, right, that doesn't allow them to walk away at that exact moment. And as a result, they die. And in many ways, we watch these characters make a series of decisions that, even though we're with them on the journey, we don't totally agree with, right? For the Teresa Mendoza character, we really felt that because her fatal flaw was her moral code. I mean, in essence, that moral code is what brought tragedy in her life, because she was unwilling to murder people with a bloodlust and to gain power. Because of that, because she held on to that moral code, we really felt like this character deserves a happy ending. She doesn't deserve the ending that these other characters experienced, because essentially her arc hasn't been that, right? And so we just felt like, because she was a character that tried desperately to maintain that moral code, that she deserved that ending. And and even though, like, I know you say, and we feel like it's a happy ending because Teresa Mendoza survives, it's not really a fully happy ending. She lost a lot of people she loved.
Yeah.
Most of her family died along the way. But her and herself, she survived. And part of that, also, the idea was that, in these stories, there are two character arcs, right? There's in the through line of the tragedy for these characters, there's the death, the physical death, and there's the spiritual death of the characters, right? And so for Teresa, the queen represents that death. So in an essence, she does actually die at the end. The queen dies, but Teresa Mendoza, the character really with that moral code, she survives. She gets to survive, and she also gets to survive because she's the one who kills the queen. So what we were that's what we were exploring.
When I was in looking back at the subsequent seasons, Teresa has really dealt with a lot of men over the last two seasons, especially. It was fascinating to realize that she never came up against another woman of power like Camilla in season one. Was that a conscious decision as the series went on to touch on those more misogynistic elements that as women rise in power, they're not often seeing their peers? Or am I just completely coming up with a theory that is just insane?
No, you're right. We wanted to explore that, but also we spent 3 seasons with these two women in power kind of fighting against each other. And we just felt like we went down that path. And we didn't want to make the show about women in power constantly fighting and undercutting each other.
Yeah.
In reality, if you're talking about organized crime, you're for the most part, you're talking about a patriarchy, right? And so we really needed to explore that, but also we wanted to have her essentially in conflict with people who represented the exact opposite of her spirit, right? Men who had bloodlust and weren't afraid to murder, right, wholesale. And so that was a part of it, and also men who were misogynistic and looked down on her, discounted her, and to put her in situations where she was having to prove herself and continually outsmart these kingmakers who thought they were on top of the world. So I mean, that was a big part of it.
Well, speaking of men that have been with Teresa in her arc since the beginning, I love that the finale is focused on Pote. We get to see his journey and his redemption and that creation. I mean, can you talk a little bit about crafting the finale and knowing that you were gonna have to focus on another character? I mean, Teresa's been at the center of every episode, for 5 seasons. What was it like to follow a different character to close everything out?
Yeah, well, it began in season 4 and then into season 5, where Pote became not only Teresa's confidant, her bodyguard, but he started to become, in many ways a father, right? First to Tony, right? And then his relationship with Kellyanne led to her pregnancy and, the potential of becoming a father again. So we really wanted to explore that. We wanted to explore what happens when his loyalties are kind of split, right? Like what happens there. And also, because Teresa wasn't coupled up the way Pote was, we thought, okay, what happens now for this Sicario, this guy who literally, as he said, like the thing that he does the best is killing people, right? That's his job. And so for him now to have the prospect of fatherhood, especially after with the time that he spent with Tony, we just thought that was really interesting. And it became in many ways the heart of the series in season 5, because Teresa going into season 5 made a very specific decision at the end of season 4, which is, I have to put aside my moral code. I have to become pragmatic, cold, and calculating, and I can no longer hesitating murdering people for expedience, right? So Teresa's arc went like this. Pote's arc went the opposite direction. So he became less and less interested in just killing people. He became interested in family and the survival of family. So that was one of the things that we really want to explore. And of course, the most interesting person in a way to explore that with, the guy who literally his job is to take life, is now going to usher in life. And what would that look like? So that was really important to us. Heading into the finale and following that storyline with Pote, we were really invested in his relationship with Kellyanne, and also the idea that maybe they could have it. Maybe they could walk away and have a life, and we're rooting for them, and so, a couple of things about the finale. we knew that in the end of episode 9, when we shot Teresa, going back to the pilot, that the audience would be questioning right off the bat, okay, they faked it, right? So with that in mind, we knew that we really wanted to convince the audience that Teresa was dead in order so that we can have the greatest impact when we get to the revelation at the end of episode 10 where she's alive. So how do you do that? So we spent the first 30 minutes of the episode over and over again reinforcing the idea that Teresa's dead. The only ones left is Pote and Kellyanne, and will their family survive? And they're on the run and they're on their heels. And how could you not be invested in that? And so while we're mourning the loss of Teresa, we're also holding our breath and hoping and praying that Teresa and Kellyanne make it out alive. And so that was what we were really wanting to do, to have the maximum benefit at the end. You know what I mean? And so
Exactly. Well, the series coming to a close, we've talked about this before. It is one of the few, if not, I'd say only instance of a Latina-led drama in prime time that has gone on for 5 seasons. Now that it's coming to an end and we're again back to this lack of diversity on screen, specifically with women of color. I mean, how do you look at the series closing as we're losing something that was really breaking new ground and giving Latinas a prime time slot, and now it's wide open?
I mean, honestly, like creatively, I think myself, Daylin, Alisi, we felt like if we were going to end, this is the place to end the show. So creatively speaking, I feel like we're excited about the ending. We feel really good about what we did creatively. When it comes to representation, it's a heartbreak, because it's not just that we had this Latina character who was the lead of a show, and we were watching her do things that we've never seen before on television, but it's the entire cast, and it's Hemke, right, and it's Alejandro Barrios, right, and it's characters we've had. I think we did a calculation. We've had like over 100 actors of color come through our series in the last 5 years.
And that's just actors. You also have a significant portion of directors too, who are of color as well. So it's even behind the camera.
That's right. And the fact that we had the cast that we had and we were in the world that we were in, it allowed us to make the fights and the arguments to get those other people on the other side of the camera, to be people of color, and so there were a lot of people who, got their first shot at directing, people that had opportunities that may not have had opportunities in other places. So in that sense, it's a real heartbreak, and, I was just talking to somebody a couple of days ago, we're about 20 years into the diversity programs, and every year there's about 5 new initiatives that get launched. And I got to tell you, it kind of makes me crazy. I wish there were half as many initiatives and twice or 5 times as many shows that were actually on the air, because I feel like in many ways, the studios and networks, they launch these initiatives and it's almost like cover for them, right? So that when people go, where's the diversity? Well, we're doing something. We have these initiatives, but you know what? Where are the shows? Why aren't they buying the shows? Why are we talking about Alicia Braga leaving, and why aren't there 5 other characters, female Latinos that are, running, that are the head of television cast, right? And so it's like, it really, that part of it makes me crazy. It just makes me insane that we're having this conversation 20 years after the launch of really the diversity programs. And I got to tell you, this last year alone, there were probably a half a dozen new initiatives that started. And I just kind of shake my head and I go, like, you can do all the initiatives in the world, but the proof is in your programming, and that's not showing up. And that's really where we need to make the fight.
Exactly. Well, the last question that I wanted to throw out is, it's something I asked Elise when we were talking before, but working with a character for this long, has it been easy for you to shed Teresa Mendoza from your life now that it's over, or is it still is she still holding on?
I mean, it's not just Teresa, it's all of the characters. We have a hashtag Queen Familia, and we've become that, because we knew that we were all, locking arms, shoulder to shoulder, making this fight to keep the show on the air for 5 seasons. And, it was something that was beautiful. I mean, the guest stars and the actors that would come onto the set, they were constantly telling us, like, I've never experienced anything like this before. And we would just say, that's familia. You know what I mean? Like, we take care of people, we welcome people in, we give people opportunities, and we want everybody to feel like we're looking out for them, we're protecting them. If there's an actor that's having a tough time, we don't move on. We allow them to take the time to get the coverage we need, so that everybody walks away feeling like they did their best work, and they're properly represented. And so, those are things that are very important, and so, in terms of characters and writing, I just, in my head, like, I imagine that somebody will pick up the phone and go, like, we made a mistake. You know what I mean? And let's do, 1, 2 more seasons. In my head, I'm bouncing ideas like, is there a movie version that we can do? You know what I mean? For the fans, because we have these amazing fans all over the world. And so I don't think that Teresa Mendoza is ever going to leave, my consciousness. There's always something there. And of course, after 5 seasons, she's a big part of who I am. And in a sense that, you're writing who you are into that character, just like we're writing who she wants to be, Alicia Braga. And so, like, there's so much of myself, and the other writers in these characters that there's no way you'll never divorce. You'll never leave them. They're always there. And so, yeah. So to answer your question in a long roundabout way, I don't think that that's possible.
I would be all for a movie where Alicia does nothing but run and be awesome. I support this. I'm putting this out into the ether. This needs to happen. So, Ben, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about this series. Can't wait for people to enjoy it and hopefully discover it and all of the things. It's just been such a treat.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.